Christmas Eve has always been weird in my family. Not magical, not warm and fuzzy, just weird. We go through the motions, tree, food, forced carols. But underneath, there's this cold, thin layer of passive-aggressive tension, like we're all pretending to be some picture-perfect holiday family, while carefully avoiding stepping on the landmines of each other's egos. I used to chalk it up to everyone being tired or stressed, but as I got older, I realized something else. My family isn't dysfunctional because of misunderstandings. It's dysfunctional because some people in it actively enjoy stepping on others just to feel taller. My name's Nathan. I'm 32 now, but this story starts last year, when I was 31. I've always been the quiet one in the family, which, ironically, gave everyone else permission to project whatever they wanted onto me. My mom called me the mellow one, as if I were just too low energy to get involved in drama. My dad used to joke that I was the accountant of the family, even though I don't technically work as one. I do freelance financial consulting, mostly for small businesses. It's remote, it pays well, and I like it. But to my family, if I wasn't waving a job title they recognized, I might as well have been unemployed. Then there's my older brother, Eric, 35, loud, opinionated, and the golden child ever since we were kids. He always had this way of taking up space in a room, like he thought oxygen itself was his by birthright. And the worst part? My parents encouraged it. I mean, they worshipped this guy. In high school, he was the football star, the one with girlfriends, the one they thought would make something of himself. Never mind that he flunked out of college his second year, started 3 businesses that failed in under a year each, and now works at a car dealership. Every family dinner still somehow circles back to Eric's doing great these days. It didn't bother me when I was younger. I just stayed out of the spotlight. I liked numbers, computers, anything that made logical sense. I started helping my dad with his taxes when I was 15. By 20, I was managing a few of their rental properties' bookkeeping on the side. They never asked questions, just handed over receipts and bank info. Nate's got it covered, they'd say. Over time, I handled more and more: mortgage payments, insurance renewals, even the wills, ironically enough. It was always under the guise of, "Oh, you're so good at this stuff, son." But let's be real. What they really meant was, "We don't want to bother." Still, I did it. Not for recognition. Not even out of love, necessarily. More out of duty. Like it was easier to be the one who kept everything running quietly in the background than to watch the whole circus burn down. But Christmas Eve last year was the moment it all clicked. The moment I realized just how invisible I really was to them. We were at my parents' house. The whole family gathered. Mom made her usual dry turkey. Dad drank a little too much wine and kept repeating the same story about the time he met some guy who almost played for the Giants. My sister Lila had flown in from Texas with her husband and their new baby, who everyone fussed over nonstop. And Eric, of course, was in rare form, swaggering around the living room like he owned it, loudly telling everyone how he was this close to making regional manager. I was sitting quietly near the tree, sipping my cider, when the conversation turned toward family traditions. My mom started reminiscing about how we used to go sledding, how Eric would always lead the charge and come back with his nose red and his coat soaked. Everyone laughed. Then she said something like, "And Nathan, you'd always be so quiet on the hill, like a little old man just watching everyone." More chuckles. I forced a polite smile. Then Eric chimed in. "You know, I bet if Nate disappeared one day, no one would even notice for, like, a week," he said with a smirk. "Maybe longer." The room burst into laughter. My parents, my sister, even her husband. I remember the sound of it so vividly, this warm, collective wave of amusement that I wasn't invited to, that I was the punchline of, that, for once, no one even tried to mask with a "just kidding." I looked around the room. No one rushed to correct him. No one said, "Hey, that's not cool." No one defended me. Not even a half-hearted "don't say that." I know it might sound silly to someone outside the situation. A single comment. A joke. But it wasn't just the joke, it was everything behind it. The years of being the reliable one, the background character, the free labor, the unappreciated fixer. And now, apparently, the one they all agreed could vanish without consequence. That night, something shifted in me. I didn't say a word. Just sat there, quietly absorbing the moment like I always had. But something was different. Something had snapped. I finished my cider. I helped clear the table. I even stayed for dessert. But my mind was already miles away, sorting numbers, making lists, running through account logins and access points. Because what they didn't know, what none of them ever bothered to learn, was that I had the keys to everything. The accounts, the passwords, the legal documents, the backup drives. And if I really wanted to disappear, I could do it in a way that would make them wish they'd never laughed. That was the night the plan started forming, and it would take exactly 7 days to execute. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before anything could happen, I had to give myself one last gift, watching the cracks in their perfect little world start to form, one tiny shift at a time, starting with the smallest thing they didn't even know I controlled. By the time the dishes were done and the dessert plates scraped clean, I had already decided I wouldn't be attending next Christmas, or any after that. But I didn't tell anyone. I just sat through the rest of the evening, wearing the same polite, invisible smile I'd worn for the last 31 years. That was the thing about being the quiet one. They didn't notice when you were truly angry. They mistook silence for peace, obedience, weakness. I stayed the night, as expected. My childhood bedroom was now a guest room, sterilized and stripped of any sign I'd once lived there. Just a bed, a few generic paintings, and a lamp that flickered if you turned it on too fast. Eric's room, of course, remained untouched, a shrine to his high school glory, complete with a framed jersey and old trophies no one had dusted in years. I noticed that when Lila visited, they put her in there. Because the baby needs more space, Mom had explained casually. I didn't argue. I never did. The next morning, I got up early, brewed some coffee, and stepped outside for some air. The cold hit me hard. It was one of those mornings where the frost clings to the edge of the porch railing and everything feels suspended in a kind of sleepy stillness. I stood there a long time, my hands wrapped around the mug, my breath visible in little puffs. I didn't feel sad, not exactly. More like hollow, like I had finally accepted something I'd been resisting for years. When I came back inside, I heard them talking. Not whispers, just casual conversation happening around the corner in the kitchen. They didn't know I was awake. He's always been weird, Eric said, snorting. I mean, come on, what grown man just disappears into spreadsheets all day? Probably doesn't even have real clients. I know, Mom replied, sounding half bored, half concerned. I do worry about him. He's so closed off. Sometimes I think he might be on the spectrum or something. He never really connects with people. Then my dad. Well, maybe if he dated once in a while instead of hiding behind a computer, he'd be a little less awkward. Lila didn't say anything, just a small, tired sigh. And that's when it landed. The truth, cold and clear, they didn't see me. Not really. They didn't understand me, didn't care to, and worse, they didn't respect me. They tolerated me like you'd tolerate a strange relative at a reunion. Someone you nod politely to but avoid inviting to anything meaningful. I left that morning without saying much. Just packed up, thanked them for the lovely evening, and drove back home with a calm I didn't expect. Because now I knew. There was no fixing this. No talking it out. No big confrontation that would somehow open their eyes and make them realize what they'd done. This wasn't a single incident. It was a lifetime of being underestimated, overlooked, and ultimately used. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just their weird son or brother. I was the one who had been quietly managing their financial lives for years. I had access to everything. My father had always been terrible with paperwork and late on bills. When I was in college, I offered to help out as a way to stay connected. One account turned into 3, then 6. By the time I was 27, I was logging into more of their accounts than my own. Rental properties, investments, even their life insurance policies. Over the years, they handed them over one by one like it was some kind of chore they were lucky I liked doing. I created a shared spreadsheet for them, thinking it would help them keep track. They never looked at it once. They called me the walking calculator, which was meant to be funny, but it wasn't. I was their safety net. The guy who stayed up late making sure a mortgage didn't default, or that their condo in Sarasota didn't lapse on property taxes. And here they were, laughing at the idea that I could disappear without anyone noticing. I didn't start the revenge right away. No, that would have been too impulsive. I gave myself a few days to breathe, think, plan. I made a list, not of assets, those I already knew by heart, but of patterns. What payments were automated? Which emails were forwarded? Who relied on what and when? My family lived in a very specific rhythm. Rent from their tenants came in on the 3rd. The auto pay for their HOA dues hit on the 5th. Mom's credit card needed a manual transfer every 14th. It was all clockwork. Efficient. Predictable. Because I'd made it that way. And all of it ran through me. But I needed a catalyst, something that would justify, in my own mind, burning it all down. Because no matter how calm I felt, no matter how righteous I was starting to feel, there was still a part of me hoping someone would reach out. That someone, anyone, would say, "Hey, what Eric said was messed up. We're sorry." Instead, on December 30th, I got an email from my mom. "Hey, sweetie, hope you had a good Christmas. I'm wondering if you could take a quick look at Dad's 401k. He's been getting some confusing mail again, and I know you're good at translating that stuff. Love you." No mention of the joke. No mention of how I was treated. Just business as usual. I didn't reply. 2 days later, Lila texted, "Do you still have access to the Chase account for the Sarasota condo? I think Mom wants to start doing monthly payments from there instead of the BOA one. Also, sorry about Christmas. Eric can be a jerk sometimes." Sometimes. That's what she said. I replied simply, "I won't be managing the accounts anymore. Please tell Mom and Dad to make other arrangements." She read it, but didn't reply. By January 2nd, the phone call started. First Mom, then Dad, then even Eric, whose voicemail was actually polite for once. "Hey, man, can you give me a call? Mom's freaking out about some bills, or whatever. No idea what's going on. Just call her." I didn't. I spent the next week watching the storm build from a distance. My email inbox filled up with panicked messages. Some were passive-aggressive. "I'm sure you're busy, but this is really important." Others were outright accusatory. "We trusted you with this stuff, Nathan. You can't just walk away." But I could. And I did. The moment that truly broke me came on January 5th, 5 days after I cut contact. I got a call from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Eric. "Dude," he started, his voice tight. "What is your problem?" I didn't answer. "You think you're punishing Mom and Dad by going silent? Real mature. You realize you're messing with their lives, right? Their mortgage payment bounced yesterday." Mom was in tears. Still, I said nothing. "And I know you're mad about the joke, or whatever. But seriously, man, grow up. You're acting like some emo teenager." I let the silence stretch out. Then he said it. "You've always been the weird one, Nate. Don't forget that the only reason you even got to handle all that crap was because we let you. Don't think you're better than us just because you know how to log into some bank accounts." And that was it. That was the final nail. Because they didn't let me. They dumped their responsibilities onto me because they didn't want to deal with them. They let me clean up their messes for years and called it help. They gave me power without realizing it. And now, they were angry I was using it. I hung up, and I started making calls of my own. Not to them, but to the institutions. I had power of attorney paperwork. Signed years ago when Dad had a medical scare. Nobody remembered. But I had the scanned copies, the notary stamps, the dates. I filed quiet revocations, started transferring small amounts into a temporary trust I'd set up months earlier, just in case I ever needed an emergency holding zone. I wasn't stealing, not yet. I was safeguarding. But even I didn't know then just how bad it was going to get. Because when I logged into the property management account for the rental units, I saw something I wasn't expecting. A massive withdrawal. Over $40,000 had been moved out in November. Not by me. Not by Dad. It was Eric. And the transaction was labeled as investment opportunity. My stomach dropped. I opened more records, checked more transfers, and what I found next made everything personal. Because Eric hadn't just borrowed money. He'd been siphoning it, quietly, for over a year, and no one had noticed. No one but me. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, the full picture forming piece by piece. This wasn't going to be a silent exit anymore. This was going to be a reckoning, and they had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep much the night I uncovered Eric's withdrawals. It was like my entire body was frozen, my mind racing, but my limbs numb. I sat in my office chair staring at the glowing screen, line after line of financial records confirming what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't a one-time emergency loan. It was a pattern, a slow siphoning of the family's money, done with zero oversight, no permission, and, of course, no accountability. He was using the rental income like it was his own personal bank account. He'd been careful, in the dumb, arrogant way people like him are careful. Not enough to hide it from someone like me, but enough that no one else in the family would ever notice. The transactions were labeled with vague but convincing tags: repairs, maintenance, HOA dues, even tax preparation. But I cross-checked every one. There were no receipts, no contractors paid, no invoices. It was all smoke and mirrors. The total came to just under $87,000 over 18 months. $87,000. And that's just what I'd found so far. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't hit all at once. It settles in slowly, like fog. At first, I felt disbelief. Then fury. Then something else, something heavier and quieter. Grief. Not the kind you feel when someone dies, but the kind that seeps in when you realize they were never who you thought they were. That maybe the version of them you held on to, the version that was decent, or redeemable, or even just not malicious, never really existed at all. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out who I was now. Because without the family responsibilities, without the mask of dutiful son and helpful brother, who was Nathan? By morning, I knew one thing. I was done. Done cleaning up their messes. Done playing the background character. Done being invisible. But that didn't mean I knew what came next. For weeks, I fell into a kind of routine, not quite depression, but definitely a fog. I woke up late, ate irregularly, opened client emails, but rarely replied. I kept rereading the texts from mom, the missed calls from dad, even a half-hearted apology email from Lila. And then there were Eric's increasingly aggressive voicemails, which I stopped listening to altogether. The anger in his voice escalated with each message, going from guilt-tripping to outright threats. "You're ruining everything, man. I swear if you don't fix this. I'm not kidding. You'll regret this." The irony was overwhelming. He'd stolen nearly $90,000, and somehow, I was the villain for walking away. But even in the fog, something in me started shifting. I began going on long walks every morning, at first to clear my head, then just because it started to feel good. I found a park near my apartment with a small lake and ducks that always swam right up to the shore. I'd sit there on a bench with a coffee, watching them paddle in clumsy circles, and for the first time in years, I let myself just exist. Not as the family fixer, not as the spreadsheet guy, just as a person. It wasn't glamorous. There was no montage of me getting ripped or making $1 million in a garage startup. I didn't find religion or suddenly fall in love. I just got a little more comfortable being alone. And in that space, something unexpected happened. I started picking up work again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. A former client reached out asking for help restructuring a small real estate portfolio. I almost said no. But then I realized, this was exactly what I'd done for my family for years. Only now, someone respected my work enough to pay me for it. So I said yes. And that job led to another. Then another. By March, I had 3 steady clients and a 4th on trial. I tightened up my website, started tracking hours properly, even hired a virtual assistant for invoicing and scheduling. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Built from scratch, on my terms. With no one taking it for granted. I didn't post about it online. I didn't update my LinkedIn. I didn't need applause. I just worked, quietly, efficiently, doing the thing I was always best at, but now, finally, for people who appreciated it. One night, after finishing up a call with a startup founder in San Diego, I sat back and looked around my apartment. It was modest, 1 bedroom, downtown, nothing fancy. But it was clean, organized. Mine. My eyes landed on the corkboard by my desk, where I'd pinned a single sticky note months ago. I bet you could disappear and no one would even care. It was still there, still stung a little. But now, it felt different. Less like a wound, more like fuel. I didn't need them to care anymore. Because for the first time in my adult life, I was starting to care about myself. The turning point came mid-April, in the form of a letter. Not an email, not a voicemail, a real, physical envelope. Sent certified mail. It was from a law office in Sarasota. I opened it slowly, expecting some kind of property-related update. Instead, it was a formal request for documentation. Apparently, the family condo's mortgage had defaulted, and the lender was initiating foreclosure proceedings. The letter wasn't addressed to me, but I was listed as a previous managing party. That's when I realized they hadn't replaced me, even after everything. Even after I told them, explicitly, that I wouldn't be managing the accounts anymore. They'd just assumed I'd come back eventually, that I'd fix it, that I'd swoop in and clean up the mess. And now, because they hadn't taken any responsibility. The condo was days away from legal disaster. I laughed. I mean, really laughed. It was loud and bitter and cathartic in a way that made my chest ache. Because of course they hadn't replaced me. Of course they'd assumed I'd still be handling everything behind the scenes. Why wouldn't they? That's how it had always worked. But not anymore. I didn't respond to the law firm. I wasn't legally responsible. Not anymore. And a few days later, the calls started again. Lila first, then Mom, then Eric. Desperate, panicked, frantic. And for once, I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. I went to the park again that day, sat on the bench by the lake, and watched the ducks drift lazily in the afternoon sun. My phone buzzed over and over in my pocket, but I didn't check it. Instead, I pulled out a small notebook, the same one I'd used years ago to track rental income. I flipped to a blank page, and I started writing. Not numbers, not budgets, just thoughts. Who I was, who I wanted to be, what I'd tolerate going forward, what I wouldn't. It was the beginning of something. A new version of me. Not the Nathan they'd built in their heads, but the one I was finally building for myself. I didn't know then how bad things were going to get for them, or how far Eric would go to try to dig himself out of the hole he'd made. But I knew this much. I wasn't stepping in this time. And when the final collapse came, I'd be watching, not with satisfaction, but with clarity, because sometimes the only way to rebuild yourself is to let everything else fall. And trust me, it was about to fall. Hard. By May, the calls had stopped. At least, most of them. Mom still tried once a week, leaving increasingly guilt-laced voicemails that blended passive concern with subtle accusations. I don't know what we did to upset you this badly, Nathan, but this isn't like you. We're family. Family doesn't just abandon each other. Funny, coming from someone who watched her oldest son humiliate me on Christmas Eve and laughed along like it was harmless banter. Eric, for his part, went quiet. Eerily so, which, for him, was like the air suddenly going still before a storm. I figured he was either trying to find a way to fix the mess on his own or, more likely, waiting for the right moment to dump it all back on me. Like a stray dog circling the house he used to get scraps from. The foreclosure on the Sarasota condo went through. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without any last-ditch save. I followed the records online out of curiosity. A bank repossessed it in mid-May. By June, it had been sold at auction to a local investor. And my parents? They didn't call to blame me. They didn't call at all. I think that was when I finally understood just how much they'd relied on me. Not just for the finances, but for the emotional scaffolding that kept the whole fragile illusion of our family unit intact. Without me, they weren't just broke. They were exposed. They had no one left to prop them up. And that's when the idea started to form. Not revenge out of anger, not even vengeance out of spite. Something cleaner, more precise. Revenge out of principle. I didn't want to ruin them. I wanted them to feel it. To understand, maybe for the first time, that actions have consequences. That words have weight. That you can't treat someone like a doormat for decades and expect them to keep wiping your feet. But I couldn't just strike back. That would have been too easy and too satisfying for Eric. He'd spin it as me being dramatic or crazy or jealous, and they'd all believe him. No, I needed to set this up in a way where they unraveled themselves. Slowly, publicly, irrevocably. So I started gathering threads. The first step was confirming just how much control Eric had over the family assets. After the Sarasota property vanished, I dug deeper into the others. 2 rental homes in Tampa, a modest condo in Jacksonville, and an old inheritance property up in Asheville that my grandmother left us. I still had the logins to everything, though I hadn't touched them in months. I didn't make changes, just watched. And it was bad. Both Tampa homes were months behind on property tax. The Jacksonville condo had a mold inspection issue flagged by the HOA, one Eric had ignored for 5 straight emails. And the Asheville place? He tried to list it on Airbnb without ever checking if the zoning allowed short-term rentals. Spoiler, it didn't. The fines were already stacking up. My family wasn't just in disarray. They were hemorrhaging. And yet they were still pretending things were fine. I knew because I still had access to my dad's email. He'd forwarded everything to a shared Gmail address I'd set up back in 2016 and never changed the settings. He used it to communicate with tenants, contractors, banks. And through it, I watched the slow, spiraling decay of everything I'd once kept afloat. Tenants complaining about broken appliances that hadn't been fixed in weeks. A water heater leak that damaged flooring and resulted in a demand for rent abatement. Even the city of Tampa sent a warning letter about lawn maintenance on one of the rentals. It was like watching a plane nosedive in slow motion. But I wasn't just here to spectate. I was here to aim the crash. The opportunity came mid-June. Lila emailed me. Not a text. Not a call. A full, emotionally restrained, 4-paragraph email with a subject line that read, "Can we please talk?" She apologized. Not for everything, but for enough. She said she didn't realize how hurtful Eric's comment had been. That she had always appreciated me, even if she didn't show it. That mom and dad were struggling, and she was worried Eric's handling of things isn't going to work out. Translation: the ship is sinking, and she's finally looking for a life raft. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I called my friend Jared. Jared and I went to college together. He's an attorney now, real estate and family law. We hadn't talked in months, but when I told him I had something morally gray but legally cautious I needed to run by him, he laughed and said, "Be there in 20. I told him everything. The accounts. The power of attorney I had years ago. The evidence of Eric's mismanagement. The potential legal minefield they were all dancing on. And most importantly, the documents I still had tucked away in encrypted folders on a backup drive. Copies of leases, tax forms, transfer authorizations, even emails showing Eric had claimed to be managing things with my dad's full knowledge, even though he had no legal authority. Jared listened carefully, asked smart questions, then leaned back and whistled. "You know," he said slowly, "this isn't just financial negligence. This could be actual fraud." I raised an eyebrow. "Want to really get them to feel it," he said, sipping his coffee. "Don't go after them directly. Go after the tenants. Start a little chaos from below." I blinked. "How? You still have leases, right? Names, addresses, terms." "Of course." "Then let me help you draft something. Anonymously. Something that warns the tenants that the properties are in jeopardy. They'll panic. They'll complain. They'll pull their payments. Once the income dries up, your brother will have to start making choices. And when he starts cutting corners?" Jared grinned. "He'll bury himself." That night, we stayed up drafting 3 different letters. Each carefully worded. Each factual. No lies. No slander. Just truths Eric had desperately tried to keep buried. That maintenance requests were going unfulfilled. That certain taxes were unpaid. That property insurance was overdue and liability could fall on them if an accident happened on site. Then we mailed them. Anonymously. From a neighboring state. 3 letters. 3 tenants. 3 ticking bombs. Then I replied to Lila's email. "We can talk, but only in person." She agreed to meet me the following week at a coffee shop halfway between us. I chose a quiet, neutral place, small town, off the highway, unlikely to attract any of the rest of the family. When I walked in, she was already seated, clutching a latte like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Nathan," she said, voice soft. "You look different." I smiled. "You mean like someone who finally slept?" She gave a tight smile, but there was genuine sadness in her eyes. We talked for almost 2 hours. She didn't defend Eric, not really, but she also didn't throw him under the bus. She was still tethered to the idea that he could fix things if given the chance. "He's trying," she said quietly. "He just doesn't know what he's doing." That didn't stop him from stealing. I replied, calm but firm. She flinched. I laid it all out for her. The withdrawals, the unpaid taxes, the zoning violation, and then, the kicker. I told her the condo had already been lost, and they hadn't even known. She went pale. "You're not here to ask for my help, Lila," I said gently. "You're here because you know this is bigger than you can manage." She nodded slowly. "What do we do?" "We don't do anything," I said. "But you can choose which side of this you want to be on." She looked confused. I leaned in. "You want my help? You want to rebuild this mess? Then I need proof that I'm not walking back into the same trap. I need transparency, access, and your word that if I take one step toward fixing this, it's on my terms." Her eyes welled up, but she nodded. And so, I gave her the first step. I told her to check the locks on the Jacksonville condo, because that one was about to become the stage for something a little more theatrical. See, Eric had been lying to the HOA, claiming he was in the process of hiring a mold remediation team. But no such team had ever been contacted, which meant the mold. It had spread. And thanks to Jared, I now had photographic evidence, provided by a contractor friend who, for a small fee, did a casual walkthrough for insurance quote purposes. The report was brutal. Health hazard, liability exposure, lease violation. I sent the report, anonymously, again, to the HOA, with a copy to the city. And just like that, the match was lit. Because soon, Eric would have to answer questions he didn't know the answers to, while I, for the first time in years, would be standing far outside the blast radius, waiting for the smoke to clear. The first sign that everything was about to blow came not through a voicemail or email, but from an online news article. It was late July, a humid Thursday evening. I was eating dinner alone, grilled chicken, some rice, a podcast playing softly in the background, when Jared texted me. You might want to check this out. Local landlord under investigation after tenants report unsafe living conditions. I clicked the link and there it was, a photo of one of my parents' Tampa properties, yellow tape across the front porch, city inspector standing in the doorway. The article was short but damning. Mold, electrical violations, pest infestations. The tenants had filed formal complaints. And when the inspectors came knocking, the property manager, Eric, of course, had no paperwork, no permits, no current insurance. The article didn't name him, but it didn't need to, because the next day, it got worse. A local tenant rights group picked up the story and posted about it on Facebook. Then Reddit. Then Twitter. Photos started circulating of the Jacksonville condo with black mold creeping up the walls, kitchen cabinet doors hanging by a single hinge, garbage bags stacked in the corner because of a broken disposal system. And then came the kicker. One of the tenants from the Tampa property posted a video. She was a single mom, probably in her late 20s, tear-streaked and furious, standing outside the condemned house. My kids were sleeping in that room. They've been coughing for weeks. I told the landlord 3 times. He said he was handling it, but he never even showed up. If I hadn't gotten that letter warning me, I wouldn't have known how bad it really was. That letter? One of the anonymous ones Jared and I had sent. The video racked up views, over 100,000 in a few days. And the city, once happy to let property issues slide under the radar, was suddenly under public pressure to act hard. By the time the dust started to settle, Eric had received 2 cease and desist letters, 3 formal tenant lawsuits, and an audit request from the Florida Department of Revenue for misreported rental income. And me? I stayed silent. Lila was the only one who knew the truth, that I'd been the architect behind the unraveling. She kept her word. She stayed out of it publicly, but fed me updates from the inside. Eric's falling apart. She whispered over the phone one evening. He's blaming everyone but himself. Says the tenants are lying. Says you hacked the accounts and made it all happen. Of course he does, I said, stirring my tea. It's always someone else's fault. What are Mom and Dad saying? She hesitated. They're scared. Dad's not talking much. Mom's been crying. I think she finally realizes how much they leaned on you. I didn't reply right away. I was staring out my window, watching the street lamps flicker to life. Are they sorry? I asked quietly. Lila exhaled. They don't know how to say it. But yes, at least. I think Mom is. She keeps saying, we never appreciated him. Not really. I nodded slowly. It wasn't satisfying. Not really. But it was something. Still, I wasn't done. The final piece of the plan came together thanks to Jared again. I'd mentioned in passing that Eric had been drawing money from family-owned accounts, funds that were, legally, still part of the shared inheritance left by our grandmother. Jared perked up. Did he ever get explicit legal authority to move that money? He asked. No. He just used Dad's login. Perfect, Jared said. Then we have grounds for civil misappropriation of funds. If you're willing to file. I hesitated. Not because I felt bad for Eric, but because I knew a lawsuit would be public. It would be permanent. No going back. Then I remembered Christmas Eve. I remembered the laughter. I remembered Eric's voice, smug and sure, saying, I bet you could disappear and no one would even care. And I said, let's file. Jared helped me draft the documents. I didn't sue for the full $87,000, just a portion. Enough to prove the point. Enough to show I could go further if I wanted. We sent the notice via registered mail. Eric didn't respond. Then the court date arrived. He didn't show, so the judge ruled in my favor by default. I won a judgment of $26,000 and change. And then came the final blow. With the judgment in hand, Jared helped me file a lien against the remaining family property, Asheville, the house my grandmother had left for all of us. The house Eric was planning to sell, quietly, to cover legal fees. But now, he couldn't touch it. Not without paying me first. When the lien was processed, I didn't announce it. I didn't gloat. I just mailed a single envelope to my parents' home. Inside was a copy of the lien, a copy of the judgment, and a note written in my cleanest, smallest handwriting. You always said I was good with paperwork. Nathan, I don't know how they reacted. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. What I do know is that Lila called me 2 days later, her voice trembling with emotion. They know now, she said. I figured they might. They're asking if they can talk to you. All of them. Tell them I'm not ready. I said. A pause. Will you ever be? I thought about it. Thought about the years I'd given them. The things I did out of love, out of duty, out of a desperate hope to be seen. Then I thought about the peace I'd found since stepping away. The quiet mornings. The park bench. The clients who respected me. The life I'd built that had nothing to do with them. I don't know, I said honestly. But I do know one thing. What's that? I'll never be invisible again. She didn't reply. Just exhaled. And that was the end of it. Months passed. The lawsuit faded into court records. Eric's name began appearing on Reddit threads and Facebook tenant groups, a cautionary tale of what happens when slumlords get sloppy. Last I heard, he moved out of state. Took a job as a salesman for some solar company. Tried to start over somewhere no one knew him. Mom and Dad, they're still in the house. They tried managing the remaining property on their own for a while, but after a second round of code violations, they sold it off, at a loss. And me? I'm still working with clients. Still taking long walks. Still adding to that notebook where I keep track of who I am, not who they tried to make me be. And every so often, when I feel that old ache, that voice in the back of my mind whispering you don't matter, I think back to that moment. That moment on Christmas Eve. That circle of laughter. That careless, cutting sentence. I bet you could disappear and no one would even care. And I smile. Because I did disappear. And when I did, I took everything with me. And they finally noticed.